Hey, welcome back to my hobby channel and my model railroad layout. This time we're going to set the main industry for the layout, the Sly Gravel Company, in place, which I kind of see as a wink and a nod to old Sylvester Stallone, a celebrity from my home county of Lower Bucks in Pennsylvania. I didn't film it, but I dug out a shallow square of pink foam and made it the start of a stone quarry. I started by mocking up the stone elevators and put the smaller steam shovel in the pit. You got to use a little bit of imagination because quarries are huge enterprises, and I just don't have enough space to model an actual size stone quarry for this layout. Anyhow, after mocking up everything, I took some measurements on how high I needed the elevator supports to be and started the cut down process. Using flush cut snippers and leaving the legs a little longer than I wanted allowed me to push the supports into the foam and make final adjustments. The model plans call for 2 sections on each elevator, but I decided I needed to hook 3 together to make the ground connection look right, otherwise the angle just looked too steep to me. I determined which angles to put the supports at by actually placing everything on the layout, and then it was glued together and left to cure. This also allowed me to locate the motor house and to cut a little bit of the foam out to give the grate section some depth. All the foam got painted black before gluing the motor house in place with some PVA glue. After a final check for alignment, we were good to lay the ground cover. I just picked all the bits and pieces up and brought out our old friend Elmer's glue, which I spread over the area that wasn't going to have any grass. A wet china brush was used to thin out and spread the glue so that the tile grout would have something to stick to and cure in place. This stuff makes nice in-scale dirt, but it's pretty dusty. So in hindsight, I probably should have covered up the tracks and wore a dust mask. Anyhow, after it cured, I came back with several shades of gray and white pastel chalk, which I made into a fine powder using sandpaper. This was then pushed into the tile grout using a regular painter's brush, and the powder will color the tan grout to a dull gray color, like the stone that's being quarried. Everything then got a spray of isopropyl alcohol, and again I came back with a 10-to-1 PVA glue to water mix just to kind of let it soak in and cure everything in place. And while that was still wet, I glued down some pink foam forms, which I made with scraps of pink foam and sandpaper to form into small little hills. To these, I glued some of the fine gray ballast from Woodland Scenics. Several of the piles were made and glued into place and had some extra ballast dribbled over them to blend into ground. Again, watered down PVA was used to lock everything into place. And here you can see one of the resin printed dozers at work on the stone quarry after everything was dry. The grassy areas were done with the same way, laying down Elmer's glue where I wanted to go, wetting it down with, or spreading it thin and wetting it down and diluting it a little bit with a wet china brush. And then I just added 2 different shades of flocking, a burnt grass and a medium green grass to kind of give that feeling of fall-like grass where some of it's starting to die and some of it's still hanging on. They too got the watered down PVA and isopropyl alcohol treatment just to lock everything in place. Now it's time to get the building set in place. And a quick double check on alignment to the rails, and we're good to go with more PVA to hold the structure in place. Again, I like using PVA. This way it's not a permanent bond, and if I want to move the layout or ever need to pull things up, I should be able to break that bond pretty easily. But to hide these glue lines, I did add some brown flocking around the base of the building, like dried leaves getting pushed into the corner or even dried grass. You see it around the edges of buildings. There's always detritus around the edges of buildings. After giving all the glue time to dry, it was time to set the elevators in place. Where the support structures were pushed into the foam, I added more glue to hold them in place and added a little bit of weight to make sure they stayed in place while the glue set. They wanted to kind of spring back up out of the foam. I hide these joint lines where the support structure meets the pink foam by adding more glue and a fine gray ballast. This will kind of look like it's built up around the edges. And we repeated the process of bringing in big piles of crushed stone over on the other side of the single conveyor, kind of like it's finished stone, if this is going to be carted away by truck for some smaller project than railcar loads. So after a couple of days of drying time, it was time to run some trains and make a final check on alignment. To my great joy, all the track laying, the plastering over the track, adding the building, ground cover, and all the glue and isopropyl alcohol that has been scattered around these tracks for the last month or so, the siding still worked. Yes, I still need to do some final adjustments, sanding tops and cleaning up some spots where the train kind of doesn't want to move 100% of the time, but 95% of the track, the engines run over great. So until next time, happy railroading.